t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hi there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly talk show, where we take a look at some of the stories making news across Europe and break down what's at stake for you and for the EU in the wider world. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up this week, brought together by the UN, world leaders are having their annual date with the climate, this year in the swanky city of Dubai. Ahead of the gathering, protesters from all across the board were on the streets calling for adequate action now. But although the science is clear, the answers are not, and political will remains weak. We take a look at Europe's position around the COP table. And overshadowing that high-stakes summit, a big cloud of smog. According to Human Rights Watch, the United Arab Emirates is choking from, quote, alarmingly high pollution levels triggered by their fossil fuel industry. Meanwhile, here in Europe, new data says toxic air pollution is the biggest environmental risk to our health. So we're asking what more can be done to address this silent killer. With our guests this week, Chris Hocknell, Director of 8 Versa, a sustainability consultancy advising companies on how to reach net zero. Susanna Karp, EU Climate Policy Specialist and Deputy Director of Cleantech Europe. Welcome. And also Dharmendra Kanani, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe, the Brussels-based think tank. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for being with us. But as usual, before we hear your views, let's just hear what's at stake over in Dubai at the UN's 28th Conference of the Parties.
Heat waves, droughts, fires and floods. Some of the drastic consequences climate change is having on planet Earth. As scientists scream from the rooftops that there is no planet B, world leaders and business have descended upon Dubai, the city normally known for luxury shopping and nightlife. Among them, a cross-party delegation from the European Parliament and scores from the European Commission. Their call: triple global renewable energy capacity by 2030 and double energy efficiency, and also phase out of fossil fuels. With so much at stake for the climate, we ask if politicians are up to the task and if the EU is playing good cop or bad.
So that's the question we're posing here, whether or not the European Union is playing good cop or bad. But before we get into the nuts and bolts here, let's just hear what is at stake for the climate and for Europe. Dharmendra, should we start with you?
I think we are at a crossroads in terms of what's happening. We keep on hearing from scientists that this is, the hottest year ever. It's been this clarion call all the time. Yet politicians are dithering. What we have an opportunity now, what we've seen is, at the beginning, the loss and damage fund has been agreed. The thing that the South, or what we call the developing countries, the low-income countries, have been asking for a long time. So something happened really quick early on. But in reality, the conversations that are happening right now and the fact that the president of the COP says there is no science behind this, is troubling, very troubling. But the EU has been very clear about what needs to happen. I think we need to double down on renewables. We have to triple it.
We'll come to that a little bit later. Susanna, would you agree with that politicians are dithering?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. What is at stake in this COP from our perspective is going into the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So whereas before the narrative was all about targets and the rule book, now it's about deploying the solutions that we have available at the scale required to actually avoid further climate disasters. And as we've seen in the evidence you've shared with us, the world is already, unfortunately, dealing constantly with unfortunate experiences with climate. And so what we need to do at this COP is put together human ingenuity, innovation and investments so that we move quickly in the direction of scaling up the technologies we need.
But Chris, is the urgency there? Because I feel at COP, a lot of the times they just spend their time speaking about the next year's COP. Should they have more of a tight deadline here?
I think it depends who you're speaking to. I mean, I think one of the challenges is everyone's on different levels and different gears. I think in Europe we're quite advanced in our understanding and our ideas, and then we saw from the statements by the COP president other participants and actors much less so. And I think the problem is that we're talking to people on different levels and different gears. And I think what Europe needs to really do is work out how it builds the bridges and brings those people who are thinking about exploiting their fossil fuels until the very last moment on board.
Well, let's get more from Dubai and bring in our science correspondent, Jeremy Wilks. I checked in with him to see what the mood there was on the ground. Take a listen.
Yes, Maeve, I am indeed standing here on a yellow brick road. And as you will remember, the moral of the tale of Alice in Wonderland is that if you stay true to your ideas and keep on moving, then good things will happen. And for some of the campaigners here, that has happened. For example, those who are campaigning for health and climate change to be taken more seriously, they've moved from side events to being centre stage. We also saw the Loss and Damage Fund, which was decided last year, now being put into action. As far as the EU is concerned, a lot of people are looking to them for leadership. They say that the moves to reduce methane emissions that have been taken in the EU are significant and will make a measurable difference. But the fairy tale outcome that we're all waiting for is for this COP to end with a line saying we will phase out fossil fuels. At the moment, I think we're still in la-la land on that one.
Jeremy Wilks there reporting for us with a clear message that if we are expecting that statement on phasing out fossil fuels, we must forget it. I mean, that is, of course, what happens when an oil-rich nation, an oil producer, hosts the COP, like what we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they have such an inversely invested interest in this agenda, and ultimately, regardless of what the president said, and we have also seen communication from other petrostates as well, kind of resisting. The only way out of this is a phase down and phase out eventually of fossil fuels. There's absolutely no way around that. That is absolutely concrete. It's just how and at what pace and who can we bring on and what the solutions are and the alternatives.
And just in case our viewers didn't see that controversial statement that the president of COP, Sultan Al Jaber, said, it went viral, I mean, on social media a little bit earlier this week when he said phasing out coal, gas and oil would take the world, quote, back to caves, and that there's no science to show that that phase out would restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees. Susanna Karp, but what Jeremy Wilks, our correspondent there, is saying as well, that the world is looking at the European Union to lead. I mean,
yes, and
are they leading?
In that regard, indeed, we're seeing very good news from the European Union at this COP. And exactly the tension you were discussing earlier is really a tension between the dirty technologies and the clean technologies. And so what we've seen from the European Union side already on the second day of this COP was a big announcement of 240 million euros invested with the help of the European Investment Bank, as well as Breakthrough Energy Catalyst Project and the European Commission, into 2 European companies to scale up long-duration energy storage, so Energy Dome, as well as Ørsted in Sweden, to develop green fuels. And so actually what we are seeing is that the European Union is reclaiming its climate vanguard, its climate pioneer innovation role. And
And even though many I speak to here myself when we're reporting, they're like, we don't just want this pressure on us here in the EU. What about others? They need to do their part as well. They feel a little bit under pressure.
Absolutely. What we need to say, on the one hand, because I was interviewing the EU Commissioner for Environment earlier this week, and what's clear is that on the one hand, the Green Deal is probably one of the biggest things the EU has done, other than the Resilience and Recovery Fund, right, during COVID. And what they need to be engaged is what, whilst they're there, is climate diplomacy. And you need to up the game on that. And actually, if we don't do this properly, and if we just sit around like we are here and don't have measurable action taking place, what we'll see is a kind of a backlash from people on the ground, because suddenly, as we are finding out now, poor people are being asked to adapt their heaters, their boilers, their consumption habits. But they're thinking, well, if politicians and others thought this was such an urgency, why now? And why are we paying for it? And you're going to see that backlash. You saw that in the UK in Boris Johnson's seat.
Well, let's get the perspective from Chris. You're based, of course, in London. I mean, here the European Green Deal was sold a couple of years ago as Europe's man on the moon moment. We're seeing it's tricky to get across. What are you seeing there with the UK's ambitions? How are they getting on?
Well, there's been a rolling back, as you may have seen, with Rishi Sunak. He's kind of rolling back some of the ambitions, as I think from our perspective is that we're in this kind of rubber hitting the road phase where we've come up with these pledges and these aspirations, and now we're trying to work out how to implement them, and there's pushback and there's political fights going on. I think one of the things we need to remember is that we can't. There's a tendency, I think, in the environmental movement to have a unilateral approach, and I think we need to recognise that Europe itself is only 1/5 of emissions. It needs to bring the other states on board. Needs to work out technology transfers, funding, all of these things. Going it alone is not going to work, because climate change is not territorial. It's about CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. It's that simple.
It's not going anywhere. And as we've seen from the science, and you alluded to it as well, this reminder that 2023 was the warmest year on record. But Susanna, is COP the right place to have these conversations? I mean, or is it just turning into some sort of a media circus, a climate festival? What's your take?
Very interesting question, first of all, and the world cannot actually afford a bad COP. So this is really, to your initial question, I think, as we've just discussed, there is no option for the world, because we are heading very rapidly towards increasingly warmer scenarios than we expected. As a result, I think that the partnerships and the ecosystem focus of this COP are there to stay, because what we need to do is actually win in the race against time, effectively. And so any opportunity to bring together those who can move rapidly on solutions should really be cherished and maximized. And there are certain things to learn from this COP. For example, when we think of scale, traditional energy majors can actually, by divesting away from their, let's say, traditional sources of energy, but they can actually, let's say, share lessons learned for the newcomers, the next generation of industry. Now, it's true that they haven't been present at this COP, so the innovators have not actually been able to take part in this COP at the same level as the big oil majors. Having said that,
your reaction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're being really diplomatic, if I may. I think it's a jamboree, it's a talking shop, and nothing happens as a result. We've not seen any practical, measurable action coming out of a COP up to now. This time, yes, first day, first weekend, loss and damage comes through. Great. But just think for a moment, we have more fossil fuel companies attending this COP than there's ever been in the history. Double, triple the amount from last year, right? Secondly, when you talk about the EU's role, we mustered in Europe more money for COVID, right? Triple or quadruple the amount that's being pulled together right now. And you know what's worrying is that it's only adversity that's going to make politicians move. We've seen the weather conditions. We've all been in places of extremity, and it's the poorest in our communities going to suffer the most. And suddenly everyone will say, oh my goodness, it's a pandemic type of experience. And this is an existential crisis. Yeah. We need to get a grip.
It creeps into the room, or creeps into their EU summits here in Brussels. Chris, your perspective on that, is COP just a talking shop? Should they start wrapping them up anytime soon?
I think they need to happen, but I mean, they are semi-pointless. It is a talking shop. There's I think a lot of interesting things happen around some of the fringe events and the other supporting stuff. There's some interesting conversations, and I hear from my contacts and people, associates there, that good things are being talked about, but a lot of it is just chat.
And what about your companies that you're consulting? Like, how are you holding their hands on their journeys towards carbon neutral or net zero?
Yeah, so the challenge is that we have is, to be quite frank, we still don't have the clear cost-effective solutions in hand, and it requires an awful amount of infrastructure, investing, and financial planning to get this running. And many of the options that companies have are kind of out of their control, apart from cutting their business operations. Things like the decarbonisation of the electricity grid from the implementation of renewables and things like that. That companies can't affect that. That requires governments and big structure.
Well, look, Susanna, you mentioned earlier one of the big stories coming out of COP this week, one of the headlines, if you like, it was about tripling the installed capacity of renewable energy by 2030, something, of course, that will only work if you double energy efficiency. And we wanted to get the perspective of an engineering company working on cooling and heating systems. So we spoke to Jürgen Fischer. He's the president of Danfoss Climate Solutions, and he's just back, in fact, from COP.
If you do the math, 3 times is not enough, but there is a good option to increase energy efficiency targets, to double them from 2 to 4%, and that of course could help together with the renewables to make it happen. And thereby, I think we have a clear plan between now and 2050. Energy efficiency is more important and faster there than building renewables. There is a big issue in building renewables, as you know, right? There is political money reasons not to do it, and but saving energy, we can do that today already by using technology which is there today.
Jürgen Fischer there saying that a clear plan has been put on the table. Do you think this is a big deal, this pledge?
the pledge it's a good pledge to have, but in reality, when I kind of think about what you do in your trade, in your trade in clean tech, the solutions are there, right? Innovation is in place. We know what to do. We just need to have the political will and the attitude, and there's enough money. I mean, when you speak to private sector CEOs and others, they'll say, you know, if we make a market of the green transition and actually create a marketplace for clean tech, renovating buildings, etc., the money will come. But you need the political leadership, and you actually need to have the taxpayers' money going in as a patient capital that will enable you to take risk, but actually time is running out. Go for it. What we do is get caught in nonsense.
We get caught in nonsense, and I find we end up reporting and discussing that nonsense a lot here on the show, but we obviously want to find solutions as well. I mean, would you agree with what Dharmendra said there, Susanna?
To some extent, but not entirely. And so what I mean by that is that whereas previous COPs were extremely focused on political statements, on high-level declarations, what we're seeing in this COP is a very practical focus on what can be done, what can be scaled. We do have the required technologies for for reaching the majority of emission reductions. And indeed, there's the next generation of technologies for carbon neutrality that we still need to get to market. But right now, the solutions are there. And so it's interesting to see that, the political negotiations, which have just started, but they have taken secondary place in this COP, whereas the big focus has been indeed on the financial agenda, which has been considered to be the most ambitious one, but also getting agreements through on concrete projects, on concrete funds, and so very interesting in that sense. And I'm wondering if this doesn't signal a change in the nature of COP towards exactly sort of an amplification of deployment. And it's true, we need political will, absolutely, but we also need the private sector to really step in and take on some of the risk, because the public
Are they willing to take risks, though?
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I think the problem is that we underestimate the scale of the challenge. I think I see this a lot in the environmental movement. They play down the scale of the challenge, but from my estimation, the scale of the transition and the transformation that's required, it's something akin to almost a World War II level mobilisation for decades. It's not something you can just install a few things here and there and a bit of energy efficiency. It is enormous, and we need, we're talking trillions and trillions of euros of funding. It's not just off the shelf.
It is, but I mean, look what we did with COVID. What did the world do? Right, because we knew people were going to die. We knew it was a threat to generations. We mobilised. We built hospitals in weeks. We mobilised cash on a level we never would imagine, and the world worked together. Okay, there was both a moral and economic imperative, but it happened. What we don't get here is a grip on the fact that, imagine next year, right? Look what's happened just this year in terms of extremities of weather. Okay, for everyone across the world, everyone. Imagine that doubling next year, because it will be hotter next year. And what's going to happen? We don't have seasons anymore, don't forget. We're going to have types of weather in the UK or in here, in Brussels and elsewhere, that we never imagined. And then we'll say, really? And the only point I'm making is, I understand the scale of the challenge, but what we need is, when we don't have, is the kind of Greta effect at political level, to say, mobilise the political will to say, enough. We need to get a grip and move quickly.
And we don't even have a Greta effect really on the ground. No. I mean, we're not seeing the Fridays for Future mobilise as they were. And we've seen earlier this week that scientists are petrified. In fact, ahead of this meeting, hundreds of scientists took out their pen and wrote a statement saying, we need you. We are terrified. A call to people to actually become activists. But as you can see, people are tired, people are stressed, people are thinking about the problems in their daily lives, and they don't want to have to take on this themselves.
So if I may contribute, if at the last COP before the pandemic, in discussions at the European Union stage, I mentioned that there will be a time for the private sector to step forward. And so what I see, working directly with innovators, with those who are investing, risking their own money effectively to support development of technical solutions, what I see there is that the clean tech ecosystem is becoming right now the activists in the room. So they are actually the ones that are pushing the conversation forward and being uncomfortable in rooms, asking for money to be divested away from fossil fuels towards the solutions that have net zero emissions or zero emissions. And so that design out CO2 from production processes.
Okay.
I think the renewables companies have a financial incentive, obviously, to do this, but I think the challenge is that no governments or politicians are willing to be honest with the public and say net zero is going to cost you €5,000 per head for the next 30 years, and no one's willing to do that. French
and that's
UK.
not getting them the votes either. I'm going to have to stop you
please.
there. I'm afraid we have to take a short break. But do keep an eye on Euronews.com for all the latest from the COP. We have a daily blog from the ground. But for now, stay with us, because after the break, we'll be telling you about Europe's severe public health crisis of air pollution. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with my panel, we're talking through some of the news stories of the week. And one image that struck us here was the cloud of smog hanging over the COP28 in Dubai. The level of pollution was labelled unhealthy. And here in Europe, although maybe it's not quite as bad, the European Environment Agency did just warn that air pollution in Europe remains the largest environmental risk. It's causing asthma, heart disease, strokes and lung cancer, and thousands of premature deaths. I mean, this report is new, but the data is not new. I feel like we've been hearing this message for the last couple of years. What needs to be done, Susanna? Is it better implementation of rules we already have, better governance? What's going wrong?
So you rightly pointed out that we've had these numbers for a while, and I remember already the last GASP report that came out in 2018, looking at numbers from 2016, and actually seeing that 137,000 children in the European Union were having asthma attacks because of air pollution. And, you know, kind of the number of 50,000 premature deaths per year has become sort of reported on frequently ever since. And then we've had the pandemic as well, which showed that actually those in areas which had higher air pollution were more prone to die from COVID. So all of these risks are sort of being exposed, and yet nothing is really being done. And so this is worrying. What needs to be done are very strong technology mandates, for example, around diesel cars or so, but they have to be EU-wide, right? So we actually have to move faster on banning the internal combustion engine.
And that's what doctors and pharmacists are telling you. Like, I mean, they've small kids coming in constantly with issues related to this air pollution. Dharmendra, what's your take? What?
I think it's really important, and you know, your facts and figures you're stating are really important. But let's just say this, and this is really important for the audience that are watching and listening. Air pollution is killing Europeans more than car accidents at the moment. That reports, the summary is that we need to get a grip and realise that it is killing more Europeans every day than car accidents. So once you factor that and feature that in, we need to have a better sense of how do you depollute and make our air consumption less toxic. And we know the clean tech industry can do this, you know, in terms of, it's not just about cars, it's also about how our local cities are managed, and there's ways in which you work with communities about consumption and what you do about air cleaning systems in local areas which are available, but they need investment.
And Chris, this is obviously a big challenge and struggle as well for London, a city like London. Any tips for us here?
Yeah, so London's been really successful in the last 7 years. And if you look at the data in 2016, it wasn't great. It was pretty dire. In the last 7 years, there's been some quite substantial steps. And that was a combination of increased pedestrianisation, quite aggressive mandates on what was considered to be compliant. So the age of the transport stock that's driving around London is much more new than many other cities, and that helps a great deal. And also other kind of limits on, say, actually demolition. You know, demolition of construction and buildings, that creates a whole amount of pollution. Burning gas in your boilers, that also puts out quite a lot of pollution. So there's actually multiple areas that need regulation around, say, creating clean air zones, for example. And it's not just transport, it's many things, you see.
It's many things. And we also spoke to the head of the European Environment Agency as well for her take. Take a listen.
The European level legislation is only to an extent helping and solving the problems. We need also national other measures, other policies. One example is indeed, how can countries encourage homes, families to move from old-fashioned heating systems to more modern, clean, clean energy sources and district heating. And of course, cities can do a lot, especially on the traffic infrastructure, allowing much more better facilities for walking and cycling, and also, of course, public transport.
The director of the European Environment Agency there saying there's a lot more we can do in our homes as well. And Dharmendra, you alluded to that as well earlier in the show.
There is, I mean, but it's what you know, people have been saying here and others, that it's not just a one hit or one solution issue here. It's not simply about let's phase out diesel cars, let's put in pumps in our homes, let's make sure that all our public transport is electric. We need all of that to happen simultaneously. And if we don't, then this horrible fact of Europeans dying every day more than car accidents will just increase. So there's a multiple things you can do, but I think what's really important is don't make it the burden of those who are poorest in our communities to shoulder that burden. Others can do it. And we talk about cities, which are the biggest polluters.
And also in their homes. I mean, in our homes as well, there's things like soot or the way we cook that also could be impacting our health. And we have that knowledge. We don't have that knowledge. I mean, Susanna.
Absolutely, and if we're talking about cooking, there's also actually a gender dimension to air pollution from cooking, and I think this is actually a topic that's being discussed at COP right now. I hope there will be a good agreement on that coming out, but of course implementing it will be extremely difficult around the world. I want to pick up on something that Chris has said, particularly construction in cities. This is one of the biggest sources of air pollution in cities, and one where we have all the solutions, and the solutions are just waiting there. So for example, we have electrified construction vehicles, like for the whole construction cycle effectively, but what we don't have is, let's say, city administrations that necessarily are ready to step forward and buy for the whole city those fleets and then effectively just move them around from one side to the other. So actually we need to start thinking differently about models of ownership as well, and sort of how do we rent these materials, because okay, let's say equipment, in this case equipment, but let's say it may be more expensive, but if public procurement steps in and acquires this more expensive but less polluting technologies, then actually jobs become safer, the construction jobs become safer for workers, and so for citizens in cities as well.
Does that make sense to you, Chris? I mean, you worked as well.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, I think a lot of the JCBs and the mechanical plant on site is pretty bad. It was also the demolition as well. The more you demolish, it throws dust into the air, and that needs to be tightly controlled. I think one of the key things is that we need to remember is that there is an economic trade-off, and I'm not sure if you've followed what happened most recently in London with they expanded the ultra-low emission zone, and there was a lot of public pushback. And I think the balance and the approach to that might have been a bit too heavy-handed. You know, it hits some of the poorest people hardest, and we need to kind of think about how we do this. We need to have long kind of tapering costs and things like that. We need to have a lot of policy certainty so people can start planning buying new cars that are lower impact and things like that. So it's a challenge, but it can be done.
It can be done. Well, Chris, that is a very positive take. Thank you for concluding this discussion on such a positive note. But I'm sure in reality, we'll still be reading out those frightening figures for another couple of years until standards are actually really implemented. But for now, thank you so much to our panellists for being with us, and thank you so much for watching. Stay with us here on Euronews and of course over on Euronews.com. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekend show. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with Chris Hocknell, Susanna Karp and Dharmendra Kanani, we're taking a look at some of the news stories that got us talking this week. And one is that Christmas is coming, and towns and households across the continent are getting ready to decorate their Christmas trees. But with all this talk of climate goals and sustainability, some cities like Strasbourg, Grenoble and Lyon have actually ditched the traditional tree for a metallic one or some kind of an alternative. Some locals have cheered the move. Others are furious to see their customs impacted because they were really looking forward to decorating their tree. I mean, Susanna, I think this is a topic that's quite close to your heart. Tell us why.
Absolutely. So I actually started my environmental activism as a teen in Romania, campaigning against the cutting of Christmas trees, because Romania is one of the countries in the European Union with some of the largest virgin forests. And around Christmas time, I could see that the news were always reporting tens of thousands of Christmas trees cut illegally and sold on the black market. And so I thought, what is the point of having that in the first place if 2 weeks later you just throw it out on the street? And of course, there's also a climate impact to that. And so I started campaigning, and for many years I was known for this campaign. And what I noticed is that there's actually infinite creativity in communities for how you can replace a Christmas tree. And actually, it started a really nice movement amongst my neighbours, my friends. So I think
Chris,
this can be done.
What are your thoughts? Will you be putting up a traditional Christmas tree?
I think so. Yeah. I think one of the key things that that we can do to lower the impact is bear in mind that how we dispose of the Christmas tree has a huge impact. So if we put it in landfill, it can have an impact up to 4 times more than if we, say, chipped it, mulched it and put it in the garden or disposed of it more appropriately. If we buy an artificial tree, you need about 10 years of use before it's better than a kind of natural one. And obviously, if you're buying a tree, you need to get it from a proper regulated nursery, that's FSC, and you need to do your due diligence before you go out and just get
a few pointers there for our viewers who are buying their Christmas tree. What are your thoughts, Armendra? And bear in mind as well that there's a huge industry here in Europe. I think Belgium, for example, it's the second exporter of Christmas trees.
Absolutely, and the prices for Christmas trees have gone up by threefold, if you note. So the alternatives for, especially, I keep on banging out, the poorer in our community are not many. I actually think, and this is nothing against you at all, I think it's great that you created an activism, but it's a red herring. It really is a red herring, and it's also creating cultural difference by mayors and others saying, let's not do this. It's radicalising the anti-climate change movement to say, well, see, there you go, you can't even have a Christmas tree because these people are talking nonsense. And I think what would be better is on your Christmas tree or send your Christmas card to your politician and say, phase out fossil fuel and stop subsidising fossil companies. That's the 2 Christmas wishes everybody in this world should be sending to companies and to their lovely, Christmas Father Christmases or Christmas women who are political leaders.
That's an idea for your clients, perhaps, this Christmas on their Christmas card. Susanna, a reaction to Darmendra's point?
Well, first of all, I think citizens want to be part of the climate transition, and I think empowering them with choices over, alternatives to the Christmas tree is not a problem at all. And so, in that sense, it's not that we're forcing these choices upon anyone, but rather that we're enabling people to move away from the established system, which effectively will have to do for nearly everything around us, whether that's fossil fuel like the ICE, internal combustion engine on our cars, or the way we produce energy. So during our lifetimes, we will be changing effectively everything that we sort of grew into.
So will the French be throwing away the foie gras, for example, this Christmas? Will we stop using wrapping paper? Do we have to have a radical rethink at home in our households how we've been celebrating Christmas in certain parts of Europe for many years?
I think you need to be careful which battles you pick, and I think that's exactly your point. If you've got to be careful rubbing people up the wrong way with climate policies that achieve marginal kind of action. Is not, we've got to recognise that climate change is an ongoing PR exercise. We need people on our side, and we don't want to rub them up the wrong way by infringing on certain.
I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you so much, Chris, for being with us here. Thank you also to Susanna and Armendra, and thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments about Christmas trees or any other topic that we've spoken about today, do reach out. Our email address is brusselsmylove@euronews.com. You can also find us on social media. But for now, thanks for watching and see you soon.